Welcome. Today we're celebrating International Men's Day 2023, and as it has been the custom over the past 3 or 4 years at the Institute for Gender and Development Studies, we've celebrated Men's Day by having a panel discussion on issues of concern to men. This year's theme for International Men's Day is Healthy Men, Healthy World, Zero Male Suicide. I could begin by saying to you that the health of men is of very grave concern to us because men die at every stage of life at higher rates than women. And this is something that's little known. From birth until old age, men predecease women, and men die from more fatal means than women. But I'm going to let our panelists fill in those details for you. I want us to get straight into the discussion. We'll start with each of our panelists speaking for 5 minutes on a topic of interest to them around suicide and preventing male suicide. Then we'll field some questions and open the floor to the audience. I'm Dr. Karen Carpenter, head of the Institute for Gender and Development Studies, and I want to welcome our panel and welcome our guests. I want to welcome Dr. Leakin Samaj, Captain Dwayne Blackwood, and Mr. Nashawn Miller. And I'll tell you a little bit about each of them. I'm happy that I'm starting with Dr. Samaj because I decided to throw away all the notes that they sent me. And that's because it would be unfair for me to pretend not to know Dr. Samaj. And I'll let you into a secret. When I first met Dr. Samaj, he had, as I said to Nashawn, hair as thick as Nashawn's and longer. Yes? So that's how young we were. And in fact, I went to sit in on a class that he was doing to decide if I wanted to do psychology as a profession. Needless to say, however many years later, here I am. So Leakin played an instrumental role in that first decision I was making because I was between yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. And then I sat in on his class and the discussions, the precision of language, the ability to dissect and disaggregate what it is that he was presenting, and as all of his testimonials show, his ability to add clarity for topics that are sometimes considered very, very difficult is something I admire about Leakin. Sharp mind, always ahead of the game, and a consummate, I was going to say changeling, but I don't think changeling is the right word. Change agent, but not just a change agent for the society, a change agent who actively seeks new opportunities, new ways of doing things. And it's my great pleasure to welcome my brother, my friend, my colleague, Dr. Leakin Samaj. Captain Dwayne Blackwood, and I'm going to introduce everyone ahead of you hearing from them, is a chaplain of the Jamaica Defense Force. He's formerly the priest in charge. I don't know if priest in charge has some special symbol. It sounds like something that should have a special uniform. The priest in charge of the Gilnal Santa Cruz Cure of the Anglican Church in St. Elizabeth. He graduated from the United Theological College of the West Indies in 2016 with a diploma in ministerial studies, University of the West Indies with a BA honors in ministerial studies, and he's also the holder of a Master's of Arts in contextual ministry. I vowed that I was going to ask him to explain that to me. And all of these are distinctions and honors. He has served on a number of church and school boards and as a chaplain to primary and high schools, and he's currently a member of the Kingston College School Board. Captain Reverend Blackwood is also a Justice of the Peace, in case any of you want to get married today, or one day doctorate status. And he's married and has a son. Nashawn Miller occupies a very special and unusual in a good sense role because Nashawn Miller represents male persons in the Bureau of Gender Affairs. Many years ago, the Bureau decided to hire someone who would take on the issues and concerns of men and boys. And I think that people thought it was a figment of their imagination. I don't think they thought it was a real person. So it's been my pleasure to be on several panels with Nashawn and several gatherings with him. He also is a graduate of the University of the West Indies where he completed both his graduate and undergraduate degrees in sociology. He has a passion for impacting, empowering, and being an agent of change. So two change agents here. And for those who are most vulnerable within our society, this is his calling. He's successful in gaining employment at the Bureau of Gender Affairs. He used to be the Bureau of Women's Affairs. And I want us to note the change, that it's now much more inclusive. The Bureau of Gender Affairs as opposed to Women's Affairs. So often when we hear the word gender, we think women. But gender is about all of us. His passion has become his purpose. And Nashawn now serves at the Bureau as a Director of Male Empowerment in the BGA. And some of his core functions include liaising with various groups of men and boys, reviewing and assessing programs for men and boys, and conducting workshops, men and boys. I remember the first year, I think he conducted something like 300 workshops, a phenomenal number of workshops. He represents the Bureau at regular and extraordinary meetings, locally, regionally, and internationally, and I think you'll find the work that he does very interesting, because so often we think that our boys are getting ahead when they're not, and they need all sorts of other types of learning. So welcome. Gentlemen, I'm going to hand over to you, and I'm going to start with Dr. Samaj. If you would introduce us what your focus is.
Okay, my pleasure to be here. Not surprised at the absence of persons, because you know how men are an afterthought, even to men. It is a woman thing. We have about 600 entities in Jamaica that deal with women's rights and health and all kinds of stuff. But men, nothing. So it's only, I'm glad at least conceptually this was thought of. I want to start with one correction to what my colleague just said. She mentioned the death of men from birth to death. I want to suggest that it's before birth. 80% of reproductive waste is male. So if you go from conception, meaning miscarriage, stillborn, so that there's a fragility in terms of male, so taking care of us.
I see.
Right? And anything she's right, anything that kills people kill more men than women, except for one condition: death of childbirth. And if men could have children, we'd have dead more. So we're not very good at we're good at dying. Now, when I was invited to speak on the stuff of homicide, I decided to just not go conventionally, because I'm sure others were very conventional in their approach. Here's how we prevent suicide, here's what you do to. I started looking at the data very carefully. And you can go back as far as the 1700s, and you see the documentation of a relationship between homicide and suicide. Country by country by country by country, even within aspects of country, as one goes up, so does the other. And we can talk about it more specifically, some of the things that drive it. So basically what we realize that homicide and suicide are just alternate expression of aggression and violence. They're on the same plane, just alternate expression of aggression and violence. The problem is that we treat them totally different. One comes under the criminal justice system, the other, the mental health system. So when I go through when you see the documentation that exists, and you look at all the ways in which we attempt to treat suicide, and all the ways we attempt to treat homicide, the first thing I would suggest, look for the common elements in that treatment. Look for the common element, how we go about it. Because the real causality of both are significantly related. Yes. So if we take two basic constructs, anger management and conflict resolution, right? Anger management and conflict resolution. Because look at that. if we could just start teaching those two things, encouraging those two things, providing mechanisms for those two, anger management. Look how many things come out of anger. They say anger is just one letter away from danger. And you're not punished by your anger, you're punished because of your anger. Anger is a legitimate emotion, but violence is not a legitimate behavior. That's why in a state, what's a state? In a state, there's a monopoly on violence. You don't have warlords. You don't have community dons. You don't have fathers deciding to kill who they want to kill. The state has a monopoly on violence. Jamaica doesn't know that. Jamaica doesn't realize that. So that Karen does me something. Technically, I can't hit her. No, I'm supposed to.
Not even technically.
Because I would have violated a law. So that's why we understand, that's why we have a court system. That's why we have all the various elements that monopoly. The state can say that person must be locked up, that person must be killed. We don't have the right to do that. Right? So I'm saying the basic of my presentation is really around the fact that homicide and suicide exist on the same continuum. There's some complexities, but it is the expression of aggression and violence. And if we're about trying to contain, we can't contain one without containing the other. So even though we accept, that's why I have a problem with the concept of violence against women. Because I mean, say, okay, violence against men is all right. No? 94% of the people who die on the job are men. Globally, 76% of homicide are men. All right? So that most violence is committed against men. So if we are serious, and this is not just an academic exercise, we really have to start to realize the same way we go about dealing with homicide, we deal with suicide. The same issues of socialization, because what I see as the most important model for these things is the public health model. There's a public health model. It is contagious, it is disruptive, it can be raised, it can be lowered, but they influence each other. Most important impact, anger management, and conflict resolution strategy at all levels. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Smart, on that. So I'm briefly going to look at who commits suicide. Now, in many instances, we believe that persons who commit suicide have a look. There's something about them that fits them into that category. But the fact is that it can be anyone. Can be anyone. And the circumstances in which people find themselves is usually what causes them to go down that path. So let me just share a couple of statistics with you. First of which, between 2015 and 2019, 89% of suicides that were committed by men. And between 2000 and 2017, in terms of murder-suicides, only 2 were committed by women. So all the others, which numbered to about 80, were done by men. Now, if you look at the biblical aspect of it, there are a number of people in the Bible who committed suicide. People who you would think are resilient, mentally tough, people who were people of God. Isaiah contemplated suicide. Abimelech committed suicide. Samson, Zimri. These people who we believe were grounded in God actually got to that place. And of course, probably the most popular one was Judas. But what it tells us is that suicide does not have a face. And especially for males, we are in a society where we expect males to be resilient. We expect males to have a kind of persona. I share with you one instance where earlier this year, well, late last year, there was actually a soldier who committed suicide. And I went to the family's residence, had conversation with his brothers, and when they delved a little more deeply into the circumstance that may have led him to that, we recognized that he was in a place of depression. He was in a place where it was almost as if his back was against the wall. Now, if you saw him prior to that, you would think that, hey, this is someone who is strong, this is someone who is resilient, he's a soldier, so he's supposed to already be mentally tough. But the truth is that many of us, especially as males, we are under so much pressure, so much expectation, and many people, many males cannot handle that weight of expectation. I have had suicide in my family. A cousin of mine used to work at the National Water Commission. He just bought some rope, went on top of his apartment, and he put the rope around his neck and jumped off. Primarily, he wrote a note saying that, his mother was pressuring him for money, his sister was pressuring him for money. He gave them money, but it always seemed as if it was not enough. And over, I have to deal with situations, even in the military, where soldiers will tell you that they are under immense pressure. And so, one of the things I will say to all of us this evening is that do not take people at face value, especially males. Because what we may perceive, or who we may perceive a person to be, may be far from that reality. Sometimes we walk past people and we say, oh, good morning, how are you? And we just ask them, how are you, as a way of being courteous. But many of us have friends, we have male family members who are undergoing so much stress. They may seem okay, but they are not. And so, again, the who, it can be anyone. And therefore, we all have a responsibility. Whether male or female, we have a responsibility. But I would say, especially for our men, we have to ensure that we look out for things that may be affecting them. Because again, we live in a society where we are pressured. And there's great expectation. So the next time you have a conversation with a male friend or a male relative, ask them seriously, how are you? What is happening in your life? Is there anything that is causing you distress? Is there anything that has you in a place where you feel as if you are unable to overcome? And that is why we have various communities in our society. We have church communities, we have focus groups, we have peer groups, we have police, youth groups, and so on. It is to help to build resiliency. But it cannot be built if we don't know what is happening to someone. And so, in order for us to be able to transform the landscape in terms of male suicide, we have to undertake that kind of mission, and we have to take it very seriously. Because if men in our society continue in any respect to go downhill or not to be able to fulfill their full potential, it will have a devastating impact, as it already has, I'm sure Dr. Samad can probably give me some statistics for that. It will continue to have a devastating impact on the future of our nation. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. All right, so first I'd like to say Happy International Men's Day. I see a few men in here, so I want to recognize you, want to big you up, yes? All right, so today's topic, healthy men, healthy world. Funnily enough, the topic that we have chosen under zero-based suicide, of course, is men and mental health, mentally aware, mentally prepared. Yes? Look upon the men, mentally aware, mentally prepared. It's very important. Fellow colleagues here talk about, just recognizing, that men, you cannot take them at face value, literally, but you have to go a little bit deeper. And oftentimes when we talk about, issues associated, affecting men, and why men behave the way they do, sometimes they come under extreme pressure and backlash to say that they're finding excuse or they're, playing victims, when they really want to talk about what is it that they're experiencing. And while we can say there's no justification, it is important to understand some of the root causes, as to why men behave how they do. Until we recognize and understand and prepare to deal with these problems, deal with these issues, then we will continue to go down the same path, the same cycle. So looking at this topic, Dr. Simaj is here, and from a psychological perspective, most of the time we talk about mental health and suicide, we look at it from that perspective. But I look at it and I'm thinking, how do we play a part as society? What are the things that we're doing? What are we telling our men or boy child that cause them to feel this immense pressure to be masculine, to be a man, to be real men, right? So I look at that and from a psychological perspective, we come across the term of toxic masculinity. A lot of people, don't subscribe to that terminology. But when you say toxic masculinity, really talking about those cultural, behavioral norms that is harmful to men, harmful to women, and harmful to society at large. So it's really characterized by, behaviors, excessive self-reliance. As men, as boys, we're often told, you're to solve whatever issue you're going through. You're not supposed to seek help because you're a man. So you're supposed to deal with it on your own. So these are some of the social pressures that we talk about, right? And, Dr. Simaj talk about all these foundations, over 600 entities talking about, women and empowering women. Even when we look at the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, you will see gender equality and women empowerment. So, number 5, yes, just to be quite clear. So even though as the Bureau of Gender Affairs, we got the approval to have a male empowerment unit, to which I'll be the leader. Let me just provide some clarity right now, or disclaimer. I'm acting director. So it hasn't been official yet, but we're getting there, right? So as I said, we're looking to empower our men and boys. Why do we need to empower men and boys when in a society, we have a patriarchal society, a male-dominated society? But what the mistake we oftentimes make is to believe that patriarchy affects all men equally. So we think that, the 5% at the top are privileged, and it is the same for the 5% of males, or the entire 90% population that don't experience these privileges. So we oftentimes overlook our men and boys because they don't need any empowerment. They don't need any type of system in place to help them to cope and deal with issues affecting them. Whenever you bring up these topics, we don't want to hear about them. And I will tell you, being in the gender space, when I just started, trust me, you would even understand the things that we go through to get where we are today, because there wasn't any thought about men being empowered, about looking at male issues. So, no, I talk to some persons, and then, especially international development partners, and they said, we're not interested in men and boys. You know, men are all right. So I wondered to myself, that little boy in a garrison community or in a rural community, certain community, he's privileged. Yes, he has certain entitlement. But then I look around and see that over 98% of perpetrators of violent crimes are men, while over 85% of the victims in Jamaica are also men. Talk about education, underperforming. We know the statistics here at the university and other tertiary institutions. And then we look at suicide. Almost 90% of suicide victims are men. Persons will argue that women also attempt suicide, but men are just more successful. Yes? So they will give that to men, that they are really good at committing suicide, but it's not a joke matter, it's not a laughing matter. A lot of men are under social pressure. And as I said, excessive self-reliance is just one, but restriction of emotion, also another characteristic where men are not told to express what they are feeling. The anger, the pain, someone died for them, they lose a loved one, they don't know to express that, how to communicate it through love. They often communicate it through violence, anger, frustration. Yes? So it's always good to know, what is causing this, so we can be prepared, as I said, mentally prepared to deal with these matters. And finally, of course, dominance. Having to dominate, having to control, having to rule by any means necessary. So these are the social pressures that men, boys come under. And these pressures often lead, as I said, to behavior that are harmful to themselves, harmful to women and society at large. Because while they're committing suicide, they are also killing their partners often. But we need to reach a place where we can talk openly about the things that men are going through, and not to think that they're playing victims, yes, or it's not important because they're privileged, and all of the things that we say. And we're on a path where we can go there, where we can have a safe space for men to talk about things that they're facing. But as I said, where suicide is concerned, mental health is concerned, another statistics, over 80% of mentally ill patients are men. So there must be something there that causing men not to be able to sustain certain level of pressure, right? It can't be that it's just biological or all mental. There's a social aspect to it, right? As Captain said here, his family member was coming under the pressure of providing, because you cannot be a real man if you're not able to provide, right? So these are the things that we talk about. A man should provide, even though he probably doesn't have the requisite skills. Yes, the competence, the background to get a good job. He's worthless. If he's unable to provide, he's worthless. These are the thought process. And as a society, we need to ensure that we're not putting too many pressure on our man. And why we say, a good man is this, he's able to lead, he's able to sustain pressure. In the Jamaica Defense Force, you would think that is the toughest place you can find. Men are suffering also, but they have to put up this facade that, they're all right, they're okay, until they read about it in the news. So again, as I said, it's very important for us to be aware of what is going on with our men or boys, and how are we contributing, right? And we have to be prepared also when these things happen, what are we going to do? What coping mechanism is needed? So as I said, we must continue to be the change that we want to see. And if it is that we're going to put pressure on our men and boys, then you must expect a certain outcome. So therefore, it starts with us and how we deal with them. What are we telling them? Be that, men talking to each other as friends. What are we encouraging? Yes? Women as spouse, as, family members. Yes, as persons in the academia that is responsible for sharing so much information, teaching persons, what message are we putting out there? What are the prevailing ideologies? So we must be aware of what is going on and, as I said, prepared. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. I want to touch on one thing from each of you that you've said that I'm going to ask you to expand on. Dr. Samaj spoke about aggression, anger, homicide, suicide, the fact that the state should or ought to have a monopoly on any kind of punitive measures, that it ought to be the state that exercises control, and when the state no longer exercises control, then we have a state out of control, quite clearly. Are there different types of suicide? One, Dr. Samaj, and what can prevent suicide? For Captain, you mentioned the role of the pastoral service and the role of realizing that there's no one type of person who commits suicide. You can't look at someone and know that they're going to commit suicide. So we have to take more time to dig a little deeper when we actually interact with persons. But what role does the church play in stigmatizing people who've attempted suicide? And in fact, people who do commit suicide, because the church has traditionally condemned acts of suicide or attempts of suicide, and when people do indeed commit suicide, they're not allowed to be buried at the church. And for Nashawn, in your role as a social agent, social activist, social activator, I want to say, what are some of the things that the Bureau of Gender Affairs is doing in communities that the average 95% of men can relate to as they try to come to grips with their emotions, expressing them, and even their partners requiring different things of them? Because what I hear you saying is we need to differently enable men. We have to enable them in ways that allow them to be humans before they're men. So, Dr. Samaj first.
Issue of the state. This is really a part of political science, anthropology, sociology, that once you're going to call something a state, that's the basic definition of a state: a monopoly on violence. Now, if the state does not accept its role to assume the monopoly on violence, it has now left vacuum open. That's why we have guns. That's why we have garrisons. You know, the state created them, right? That's why if you look at the evolution of human societies, coming up from, you know, the pastoral and hunters and gatherers and so on, and then you see when people start to arrange themselves in bands, you have to protect your group. So you have to have a bad man. Look what happens when America tries to impose their form of democracy on our societies. It don't work, because it's the baddest bad man that control the other bad man then. So you go in and you take out the bad man, all the fries, all the mini bad man them now. Because that's the nature of humankind. And that's how male violence, male is a protector. If we don't have a mechanism to subsume and to contain it, so the state has to provide mechanisms for settling disputes at every level. If you don't, it shouldn't take 10 years or something to go through the court. It shouldn't cost you $10 million for the simplest little thing to be settled. So that the state, by abdicating its responsibility, it is facilitating the level of homicide rate that exists by people using, mainly men, using violence and aggression to settle disputes. Now, on the part, she asked about types of suicide. Now, technically, suicide is a cry for help. It's the ultimate cry for help. But what affects the statistics? Women, their cries are a little more subtle. Pills and cut the wrist and they call everybody on the phone book and they leave the phone right next to the bed, open so you can see exactly, you know, and they leave the pill bottle right next to them. But because people use the tools that they have, men's tools, weapons. So the rope around the neck or a gun to the head. Rarely do women use those methods. The effort, the pill or the slit the wrist. But I've known one young man that I've had to help to rehabilitate. His first attempt, he went to the top of the Pegasus. And when he went up there to map it out, the next day he went back up to jump. The door was locked. So he couldn't do it. But then he planned another thing. I won't give too much details as such, but what he did, the context where he got hold of a gun. The man put the gun in his mouth and killed himself. Now, can you imagine having to live with that? You put your gun in your mouth and fire it, and the bullet just goes through and don't lick anything. You can't kill yourself. Right? But that's the approach that. Now, if you notice that how even some men drive, that's also a cry for help, you know. And you've heard the concept of suicide by a cop?
Yes.
You've heard the expression,
Yes,
suicide by a cop? Now, you do something to get the police to shoot you, to get somebody to do, because you don't want to do it yourself. You don't want to do it. So these are the kinds of variations. That's why I've insisted that continuum, violence, it's about aggression, it's about violence and how we contain it. If the state abdicates their role, it leaves it open to other. Nature abhors a vacuum. And our whole society is structured in such a way to disenfranchise men. It may not sound popular to say, but look, common entrance exam or GSAT or whatever, between 10 and 12, girls are about 2 to 3 years ahead of boys cognitively. We eventually catch for about 16 or 17. But at the time where we start to separate to chart your future, the government has built no single-sex school, even though we know that development is varied. It's the church. What Jamaica has 7 all-boys schools and 14 all-girls schools. And the co-ed school, up to 6% are female. So look at what is happening developmentally. In the parishes that were built around sugar and banana, count how many high schools are in those parishes. It was intended. Who went cut the sugar cane? Who went weed the banana? It was intended. So that the whole structure, and if a man can't earn it, he is going to hunt it. So we have serious work to do, and the state has a serious role, and that's why I'm glad that I see that homicide, suicide, one continuum. You cannot contain one without containing the other.
Thank you so much, Dr. Samara. What you said reminded me of that one particular song. Look into my eyes, tell me what you said.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. You feel like being American.
Yes.
The church has a critical role to play, but you know, sometimes I have an issue when we say the church. It's very broad.
Naturally.
Because we have so many denominations in Jamaica. And sometimes what happens is that these churches are giving conflicting messages. The message is supposed to be the same, but in terms of the approach and how the message is disseminated, it is very conflicting. But one of the things that I think, or one of the places that the church needs to begin, is to better understand what suicide is and what causes suicide. I think that is the best place for the church to begin. Because, as Dr. Carpenter said, there are a lot of churches, if someone commits suicide, the church either does not do the funeral, or they do not allow the body to come into the church. Well, I can speak for the Anglican church. We allow the body to come into the church, and we will do the funeral. But there are many other denominations who do not allow that, and that is because of the perceived biblical perspective that suicide is a mortal sin and you are never forgiven of suicide. But as I clearly stated earlier, there are many men of God in the Bible who committed suicide and contemplated suicide. And who are we to judge to say that God will reject these people? Because again, we need to understand where suicide comes from. And if we begin at that place, I think especially the church will be in a better position. Also, I think we need to place a little bit more focus as the church on mental health issues. So, every Sunday, people or Saturday, people go to church and they sit down and listen to a sermon that may be anywhere between 15 and an hour. I don't preach so long. I'm more on the 15 scale. But the truth is that we can also seek to employ or to integrate mental health discussions, forums, and so on to kind of guide that conversation. Because the more we go into that direction, the more we will allow people to understand what mental health is all about. The better we will be able at dispelling the stigma around mental health, which again is a fundamental, sometimes a fundamental part of why suicide is committed. And so if we're able to take that kind of approach, we as members of the church should be able to guide that conversation and to help to reduce the occurrence of suicide, especially against male. And the final point I'll make is the important matter of pastoral care. It has to be a focal point. And, you know, there are pastors and there are pastors. Yeah. So, there are those who have a particular vision of what it means to be a pastor, fill their coffers, right? While others recognize their service as being fundamentally pastoral. And so if we are able to integrate and to utilize our pastoral care mechanisms, what we will find is that especially men will be able to open up more to us, especially as ministers, because they will feel as if they're in a comfortable space where they can do so. Many of the soldiers with whom I interact at Up Park Camp, when they come to me or come to the chaplaincy office, they feel as if they're in a safe space. And they are more likely to come to the chaplaincy than they would do to one of their commanders. Because they recognize that the space is safe. And so whatever they say, they are saying in confidence, but they also know that if it is that it is something that needs to be addressed, we will seek to journey with them. So I think that is the direction that the church needs to focus and to head into in order to make some sort of dent as it relates to suicide, especially as it relates to males.
Thank you.
All right, so what is it that the Bureau of Gender Affairs is doing in regards to, you know, the whole matter of suicide, mental health, you know, among boys, among men? All right, so we recognize the importance, of course, through research, because most of our programs and our initiatives pass through research, and we recognize just the whole importance of having healthy male practices. You know, I'm emphasizing that because a lot of what we are accustomed to, as I said, it can be really harmful, really dangerous. So recognizing this, we have been in schools, been to countless schools, talking to boys, and you know, early socialization is very important. You know, funnily, I always remember this one boy child talking to him about, you know, violence and, you know, being angry and how he responds to violence, and he said, like, when it comes to them and girls, he said when girls hit them and they hit them back, they get in trouble. But when girls hit them and they don't do anything, everybody laugh after them. So it's like, what am I supposed to do? Because I'm wrong either way, you know? So we're not teaching our boys how to navigate, you know, these challenges, because they do come. and these same boys become men, and then again, we expect them to just, like a light switch off all what is it, undo all what is it that they have learned. So these are learned behavior, oftentimes, and we need to start there. That is why we even have a gender ambassador program in schools, where our persons, boys and girls, who basically volunteer to raise awareness around issues surrounding male and female. So we have the gender ambassador program. We also have a mentorship program, a male mentorship program. So tomorrow at our International Men's Day celebration, it will be at the Pegasus. So we always try to get our mentees to participate, again, exposure to what is going on. So topics like these, they won't miss. We talk about other topics, domestic violence, sexual harassment, trafficking, all different topics. But a topic like male suicide, recognize the importance, so we have invited them to be a part of tomorrow's function. And we also have a Young Fathers program, very importantly. We talk about the stress that men come under. And what we often fail to recognize that this is one aspect, one critical aspect. You know, oftentimes person see men neglect their fatherly responsibility and say they are worthless. And we don't try to understand why is it that men run away from their responsibility. And we talk about postmortem with women going through, you know, that phase after childbirth. Men do go through a lot of the similar traits in terms of having that responsibility and feeling that they are not ready, they are not prepared. Yes? But what is it that we do? What are we prepared to do in terms of helping them? So we have recognized that this is very critical. And you know, the Women Center of Jamaica Foundation, they have an adolescent mothers program that they have girls go back to finish their education. But the assumption is that the boys or the young men just continue with their lives as normal, not knowing that they're also affected. So recognizing this, we have a Young Fathers initiative that support our young fathers. And as I said, International Men's Day, we have a week long of activities. We started with a visit to a boys' home. Supposed to have a health fair in Clarendon, but that was rained out last week. And one of the things that we want to have is a father's daycare with some of these said young men, you know, associated with the girls at the Women's Center and other young men, young fathers. So that is on the agenda upcoming for us to have that activities. Other programs and initiatives, as I said, regarding, you know, just again, sensitizing persons, raising awareness about the issues that men and boys undergo on a daily basis. What is it that we do? We need more measures in place, more policies in place. I can tell you that paternity leave was one such instance where research, continuous research and consultation, because as I said, we tend to not believe that men need systems in place, programs in place to assist them. It's almost like they should identify what is it that they need. They don't need any assistance. We already have that type of mindset or behavior practice where we don't seek help. But some of it is facilitated by not having the relevant, the requisite measures in place, programs in place to assist them. So recognizing this, we continue as we expand, as I said, from a main desk to a main unit to now have more programs, conduct more research, helping men, meeting men, creating a safe space, as Captain here said, so they have somewhere to go, someone to talk to. We have a GDV, a gender-based violence helpline, where women would call in oftentimes, but we also have a line for the men and boys to call to when they need help. Yes, I've got tons of calls, and trust me, a lot of them is surrounding Right now, I feel like I kill myself.
Nashon, can you tell us the number?
Okay, so the number for the male helpline is 553-0387, and for the female helpline is 553-0372. Some of you may know that we have national shelter for female victims of domestic violence. I get that question again. What about the male shelter? And you know, my response is normally, well, we need more men to talk up about going through things because programs, as I said, is substantiated by data. And if the data is saying that men don't need support, that level of support, men are not abused, and while the data is saying that, we know that it's contrary to what is going on the ground. A lot of men are suffering in silence. And again, for the same social norms and things that we push out there, you know, your friend says he's being abused by his spouse, we laugh, say, "I idiot man," right? So these are the things that we need to talk to and encourage our friends, like, you know, go seek help. Go seek help. So if we have more males reporting that they're being abused, then we can say we need a shelter for men.
Okay, so I'm going to do one last round robin, and what I want to focus on from this round is Dr. Samaj pointed to some of the state negligence, state obstacles to development that would afford both men and women, boys and girls, similar opportunities. So while, as you say, we've maintained the notion that men have always had help, patriarchy ensures their help, and therefore men don't need anything, we hear from Dr. Samaj some of the educational, at least, inequalities that exist. What are some of the things, Larkin, that we have to address if we want to also address the anger and aggression? Because that's our focus. For Captain, you mentioned the church needing to walk with the victims, walk with the person who has suicide ideation, walk with the person who's depressed, instead of locking them out, instead of stigmatizing them, discriminating against them, to make a mental health journey with them. How does the church separate mental health from spirituality? Because I find there's great confusion there in the church. And Sean, when I come back to you, I want to hear a little bit about, you mentioned one of the things that I also mentioned quite a bit, which is that the girl gets to hit the boy and the boy is not to hit back. Yes? And then the boy hits the girl, the boy is definitely going to get punished. In fact, he might get a double beating, he might get a beating at school and a beating at home. How do we address those social norms that are negative stereotypes that don't help us when we have to be two-faced? You have to show two different faces. Yes? So we're going to come back to you, starting with Dr. Samaj. The state responsibility, what are the obstacles that we need to overcome to level the playing field?
So first of all, the state, this concept conceived in sin and shaped in iniquity. Now, we have a state, the origin of our state is slavery. Not more simple than that. Then colonization, with the economic brutality, then rabid capitalism. There's all the dimensions of which the state have our life. Our politicians have codified it, they're masters of what they call negative reinforcement. You create a noxious situation, and then you ease it off a little bit, like it's humanized, but you're the one that created it, right? So that it's codified in, first of all, bring it to the family now. Jamaicans, by and large, believe in corporal punishment. Somebody do wrong? When you hit a child, you're teaching the child 4 things. If somebody disappoints you, hit them. If you're bigger than somebody, hit them. Huh? If somebody displeases you, hit them. If they're beholden to you, hit them. What comes out of that is that there are 2 extremes. Some people coming out of that, like me, my mother was a champion terrorist. What I learned from that, I will never ever hit my children. And I've never hit my children. Because I know what it did to me. Professor Gale on this campus does a documentation to show boys get the worst treatment, especially from their mothers. You're just like you know good papa. You're just like you, and all the memories of the quote unquote know good papa, she take it out on him. One of my sons asked me, Daddy, men don't have another place in school besides being guardian and sports teacher. Why when you raise your hand in school, the teacher only call on the girls and not the boys? Huh? I was doing a presentation at a company some months ago, and a man tell me, Dr. Samaj, we're tired of panty government. What do you mean panty government? I go from my mother and my grandmother. Every teacher in school I had was a woman. I've been working 18 years now, and every manager is a woman. But man can't run nothing. So, the state has a role to play in many of these things. You all know that men used to use education, teachers' college, as the vehicle for upward mobility, until the state changed the model and limited male access. Please read Professor Earl Mirrell's book, The History of, the other book, the one on the school system, The History of the School System in Jamaica, where just look at all the early politicians, teacher this and teacher that, who made it to parliament to change the society. But once you cut off the access to go to teachers' college, and that only women now use that vehicle. So the state, the same way, when we start to use the word gender, when we can't trick me, because gender is the imperialistic arm of the women's movement. They take the same thing and put the word gender, but there's nobody in the department that talk like me. There's nobody there who look at the world in terms of, especially Jamaica, what we have done to boys and men, and trying to balance that. So we cleaned up that we call it gender. But the reality is that we have adopted other people's agenda, and dismissing our own reality. And that's why we're being killed. The same boys that we ill-treat, them come kill we. So the state has a role to play, first of all, by admitting and addressing. Remember I said, we have 7 all-boys schools and 14 all-girls schools, all built by the church. Nowhere in the state you recognize that we really need to do something specific. Girls who went to all-girls school, if you come away with it that you have no limitations, you can live up X, you can do everything. Thank you, exactly. I'm a first boys who went to all-boys school, especially KC, for this. You too? I rest my case.
So how does the church separate mental health from spirituality? Now, that is a difficult one, because I don't believe necessarily that there has to be a full separation, but I believe that there needs to be an understanding of each and have each place on its own merit. So when we're able to understand mental health and spiritual health, it puts us in a better place to know and to respond to the challenges that come with it. So this question reminded me of a particular scripture when Jesus, there was a man who was among the tombs. He was chained among the tombs, and Jesus cast demons out of him. Many commentators, biblical commentators, agree that the man was really schizophrenic. It wasn't necessarily a donkey that was in it. He was really schizophrenic. And what Jesus did was that Jesus recognized
the issue that he had and was able to address that issue. And if you look at it, up to this day, we still don't know how to deal with schizophrenic people or schizophrenic. We still put them in the jackets and all of that. So,
Not mine.
well, yeah, not quite, but, and sometimes we have to cheat. So we haven't really gotten there as yet. But I don't think there needs to be necessarily a distinction, because the truth is that spiritual health and mental health goes hand in hand. If you have good mental health, you are better able to take on that spiritual journey. And likewise, if you are grounded spiritually, it helps you with your mental health. Because the fact is that even though I gave the examples of biblical characters, males who had issue grappling with the thought of suicide, or who even committed suicide, what we find in a number of cases is that because there is that kind of struggle, both spiritually and mentally, and because the church in many cases does not know how to deal, especially with mental health, and you'd be surprised sometimes the church doesn't know how to deal with spiritual health sometimes also.
Yes. That double bind where we have strong messaging about
Gender roles, strict gender roles, strong messaging about who can hit who and get away with it. And at the same time, we're telling men that they need to embrace this new kind of masculinity that's not toxic, and show their emotions and be expressive and reach out for help and call the number. Say the number again.
555-0387.
Okay, so they must call the number. How do we, in a very practical sense, you work in community, how do we actually change that culture? What are we doing at the Bureau of Gender Affairs to change the way we place expectations on men and pressure them into that kind of double standard?
All right, so as you pointed out, in society, for the most part, we have a lot of stereotypes and double standards in gender. You know, what women should do, what men should do. We continue to deal with it, and we ask ourselves, you know, why is it okay for a man to do that, but not for a woman to do that, and vice versa? Yes, but something like this, we have to start with what is in our Constitution. Yes? Fundamental rights and freedom. I believe it's in chapter 3, it says, freedom from discrimination on the basis of sex, being male or being female. But are we practicing this? I'll use a real example. So several years ago, I'm from, in a city community, and several years ago, while working, I got a phone call that my brothers are in a van with a lot of male youths. Why? Because a little girl was killed the day before. And what happened is that the police force and the JDF, they went there, and every boy, male child between a certain age, they group them up, tell them to grab up each other waist and go up in the van. They're going to process them. So I called one of the superintendents, and she said that, when I reached there, she talked to the ground commander and identified my brothers. One supposed to attend work, the other one was in a business that was established by myself, but didn't start yet, because I started early. So when I reached there, and I think I was at a humanitarian conference, yes? So when I reached there, I looked in the van, and I saw all these boys. And when I look outside, I see women, I see elders, I see dogs, I see junker, I see everything. But the boys were in the van. And I recognize a lot of them. One just played Manning Cup semi-final the weekend before, scored 2 goals. Like, what is going on here? I can't just stand up for my brothers only, I have to stand up for them. Because they say, innocent until proven guilty, even though they say they're going to process them. But what is being practiced or was being practiced at the time was the same gender stereotype. You're a young man in an inner city community, so chances are you're guilty. Just by that, they never took the time to understand that these young men are also going through the pain of losing this young girl. This is someone from their community and they're also hurt. So they're making that situation worse for them, not trusting the state, right? So these are the stereotypical roles that, and the double standard that exists in society that we need to move away from. And again, it all starts with just being aware and re-socializing, engaging the police force, engaging people in academia, engaging the state, engaging different stakeholders, international developed partners, because oftentimes what they prescribe in gender or what you see in gender is coming from them. I've been to conferences where I've seen they talking about gender in such a way that is not applicable in the Caribbean and our history and our culture. It's almost like away with men. We don't want to do with anything with men. Look how long them are dominate and them are control and around. We don't need to hear from them. We don't need them at the gender table. We don't need any type of dialogue regarding what is it that they're facing. Changing a little bit, but some of these set double standard, because how can we say that we're pushing towards equality and equity, but it just seems like that means only for women and girls, and we don't care about what men and boys are going through, which again is why we decide to move from Bureau of Women's Affairs to Bureau of Gender Affairs, right?
Sean, I thank you for that, because somehow what you're saying usually leads me to the next thing that I wanted to ask.
Right, sure.
So let me ask you now, we'll start with your work back to Dr. Samaj. The final thing I wanted to ask in one sentence, yes? Maybe two, maybe three, no more than three. But the final thing I wanted to ask was this. As a call to action, for anyone who may see the recording afterwards, anyone who's here, anyone who's within earshot, anyone who never even know that we're sitting here today, but will eventually hear what you gentlemen have said tonight. What would you say is a call to action in this country for men and for women? What do we need to do to change the reality that we're facing?
What is it that we need to do to change the reality? I always come from a sociological perspective, societal problem. It is a societal problem. Because even now, if we look around and when we talk about gender, men and women, it's always men versus women. We're pitting men against women and women against men. I always talk about right now, it feels like there's a I Hate Men campaign going on. I recognize what is going on. Social media, everything that you see. Me hate man. Me don't need a man. Me an independent woman. And nothing is wrong with being independent. But men and women are supposed to work together, not against each other. Right? And I don't see this type of behavior being practiced within certain part of society or in certain countries. It's really being practiced among the lower class, among even black persons. We are going against each other as opposed to working with each other. So what is the call to action? It's about us recognizing that we need to work together. Everywhere we go, that's supposed to be the message. Working together to achieve our targets of gender equality, gender equity, practicing it, recognizing that men are hurt too, women are hurt, and we just need to come together so everyone can live a healthy lifestyle and fulfill their potential. So I think that's 2 or 3 sentences.
No, thank you.
Which is that we need to focus our understanding of how mental health challenges affect men. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is that we need to seek to empower our boys in such a way where they will see equality for all.
My thing is the word family. So break it down to my 2.5 sentences. 1. Boyfriend and girlfriend is picnic business, adolescent business. Alright? Baby mother and baby father is the result of contraceptive failure. Nobody never, no country set out, I want to be a baby mother, I want to be a baby. Contraceptive failure resulting in baby mother and baby father. Part 3. Big man make commitment and have a wife. And gentlemen, the single most important thing that impacts a man's mental health and economic health is the person he marries. I want you think about that carefully. The single most important thing that impacts a man's mental health and financial health is the person he marries.
I think that was more than 2 sentences. I want us to thank our panelists. Please, let's have a round of applause for the panelists for what they offer. I also want to underline and underscore that it was the Institute for Gender and Development Studies that invited these 3 marvelous men to share with us today. So even though my colleague and friend talks about what we're gendering and agendering, recognize that it is the Institute for Gender that wants to hear your voice, because we do really need to influence our men positively. We do need to safeguard them, and women are a part of that safeguarding. So thank you very, very much. I understand we canvassed the audience, and everyone was saying in the audience that the talk has been very clear. Their questions are answered. And Sean, I think you couldn't say that helpline number enough times, and we need more men on that helpline helping men. So big up yourself. Thank you very much, gentlemen. It's been a pleasure. Thank you. I'm going to call our organizer to come and do her thank yous. She's bringing a vote of thanks. This is our Miss Lester, Tamara Lester.
I thank you so much for coming out this evening. And even though the men, as you predicted, would not have come to hear, but we still had some, so clap yourselves please, gentlemen, and I hope you learned something. Thank you so much. Hope to see more of you and hear more of you because you're very inspiring. Chaplain. I called this gentleman at the last minute, very last minute, and he answered the call. I don't think we could have had a better person, and I thank you so much for coming. We learned so much from you, and I really do hope that you keep your promise and that your colleagues do much more in helping our men, because our boys and our men do need the help, and we need the empowered men, because women alone can't be empowered. Oh, we're married. Yeah, so we need empowered men. Thank you very much for coming. A round of applause, please, guys. Thank you. You come first this evening, you know, all hands up. Thank you so much for coming. It's very appreciated, and we're learning. And I really do hope that the private entities do come out and support the male empowerment unit of the Bureau of Gender Affairs. I really, because I am all for it. I like that our women are being empowered, but I keep on saying the society needs to be equal. And if we're going to speak about gender equality, equal men need equal women. So we have to empower both sexes. Thanks for coming very much. Thank you, gentlemen. Have a wonderful evening. And thank you, audience.
So I think you should feel free to help have some refreshments, and I know some of you will want to speak to our panelists on their own. So thank you for coming. We have to have refreshments.